This is the Backlog Battle Podcast, episode 223.
Let her rip.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Backlog Battle Podcast. This is Alex.
And this is Daniel. So, I've been listening to the audiobook for Bible Adventures.
Ooh.
And I think you have as well, right?
Yeah, I actually finished it. Did you finish it?
Yes.
Okay.
And it was a little bit mixed. More positive than negative, but I did want to make it clear I was a little mixed on it.
Okay, yeah, I would say that I'm a bit mixed on it as well. Now, I'm kind of curious, like, what you thought of it, like, its individual parts and stuff like that, because I don't really know how to talk about this, because there's so many moving parts, into this book that... that I feel like it's kind of a little bit confusing at times.
Yeah, so, real quick, this... the book, is about religious games, and as a result, I do have to say, if you're the kind of person, like, we're not going to say anything, but in regards to the book itself, if you're interested in it, if you are a little, I guess, sensitive about the subject, it does deal with people talking about, losing and gaining faith and things like that. Just letting you know, if that sort of thing bothers you, should be a little wary.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as for the book itself, so I have to say, like, one of the things that I was a bit mixed on was the narration. Now, I didn't have any problems with, like, the voice of the narrator. I thought his voice was fine, or how he enunciated things. My core problem was simply that he made it very difficult to know when he was quoting someone.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about.
That was the main problem, because he interviewed some of the people that worked on the games.
Mm-hmm.
And you wouldn't know it half the time because he talks in his same cadence. He speaks in his normal voice when he's quoting them.
Mm-hmm.
And that made it difficult when I'm like, okay, is this, is he talking here? Oh, no, wait, he's quoting some. Okay, kind of a problem.
Yeah, I actually found that problem myself, and I think it's funny you mentioned that specific example, because that's kind of like how I felt myself, because I'd be like, oh, cool, we're gonna like hear like some other dude talk about like this so-and-so and stuff, and I didn't know where the quote starts and where it ends and stuff. Like, as a book, I think, maybe it just flowed better as a book, like a written book, but certainly as an audiobook, it certainly didn't sound that way, There was a part towards the end of the book where he talks about, like, yeah, I had my, my audio recorder and I just kept on going and stuff. And for some reason, I was expecting him to literally just play the audio recording, of that scene where, he got, I'm talking about the scene where basically they're both like at a restaurant or something, and like a college kid approached them and stuff and asked them questions, right? And then, he talked about how his, audio recording device is still going, and I'm like, oh, cool. No, that's not what we heard. It's still him narrating the book. So I'm like, oh, I mean, I'm not faulting this specifically on the narrator and stuff, but, it's... narrating an audiobook is quite difficult, and we should probably say that the narrator is actually the author of the book. And my feeling about it, and I think you would agree with this, is unless you were exemplary, like at presentation or communication, or even like that you're used to kind of public speaking and stuff like that, not saying that the author isn't, there's only a few authors that can get away with that. Only a select few. And I'm just saying this in general for any audiobook, right?
I would say Harlan Ellison can pull it off.
Mm-hmm. The guy who wrote Extra Life pulled it off pretty well. There's, again, very select few. So my question is for you, like, so I think for me, the narrator is, is okay. It's not the worst in the world. There are times where I almost feel like he's channeling Will Wheaton when he's, reading the book. I don't know if you got that kind of Will Wheaton vibe as well.
Well, I'm not super familiar with Will Wheaton, so I don't know what you mean by that.
Okay, listen to like a few bars of Masters of Doom. I mean, they have a free demo version of it and stuff, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Like, There's this kind of really rapid change of cadence sometimes that can be overly excited, I guess is the best way to describe it. You get what I'm saying, right? Like, he's just like, oh yeah, you're talking about stuff, yeah, and then somber stuff, and then yeah, like this, like it's really crazy, but and crazy, I think, isn't the right word for it. It's more like enthusiasm. You can tell like he has passion for the subject matter and stuff, and certainly that's that goes a long way. But I found it to be a little bit distracting from the subject matter as well, because aren't I supposed to come to that conclusion myself? Not just be almost coaxed into that feeling. So, like,
speaking of the subject matter, I don't know if this is the right percentage or not, but I want to say that a good 60% of the book was not about the games.
No, and that's kind of the thing that's weird about this book is that, and honestly, like, I didn't even know you were going to say that, but I was going to express that thought myself, where most of the book is actually about the company surrounding that game, like Color Dreams and stuff.
Color Dreams and Wisdom Tree, which on one hand, I want to say is interesting, right? Because, I've known about these games for a long time now because of the Angry Video Game Nerds videos on them. So it actually was interesting to hear about the people behind the games.
And that they're all atheists and shit.
Yes, which I thought was hilarious. But at the same time, though, when I see a book called Bible Adventures, I expect the book to be about Bible adventures.
Right.
And instead, the guy barely talks about Bible adventures itself, and in fact talks about wisdom trees and Color Dreams nearly their entire video game collection, or rather like all the games that they made.
Right. And that's kind of like where I just tilt my head a little bit and be like, huh? Like, I understand the kind of thematics of the books in boss fight books, right? Like, each of them are about a game, but really, like, the way that I would liken the Bible Adventures book is more so kind of like Masters of Doom in a way, where Masters of Doom really is about the people who made Doom as opposed to Doom itself, right? In the same way, in the same way, Bible Adventures isn't really about purely Bible Adventures, but the events surrounding the creation of Bible Adventures, and also, and this is something that I found really interesting, the future impact of Bible Adventures even to this day. So while the book might be a misnomer in a way, there's certainly a huge amount of information here about like the intent in which they pursued this genre. And actually, here's another thing, kind of a sidebar that was weird too, that they bring up quite a bit, the whole Christian bookstore scene too, right? And I'm like, I get that that's kind of interesting, and it is seminal to the talk of the video games being sold, the Christian video games being sold.
And it also explains like what happened to Wisdom Tree and why they went out of business.
Yeah, or in that case, I know what you mean, but like, I don't know, like, I personally don't know how I feel about this book overall, because there's so much kind of disparate information that they are kind of connected by this glue of like, hey, yeah, this is a development company that's like that made Christian games and also reverse engineered the NES. And mind you, like at the very beginning when they were talking about how they were reverse engineering the NES, I was like, I have no fucking clue like why they're talking about it in that fashion, And so it's I don't know, like, it's just the flow of it was odd to me, but
it kind of felt like to me that the author wanted to write about, Wisdom Tree and Color Dreams, and then when the author was doing research, found out all this other information and just wanted to write it all in the book.
Mm-hmm. And I totally understand that, especially if if you want to provide a lot of context to what's going on and stuff. And to me, like, that's actually really important sometimes to provide. But at the same time, you got to ask yourself whether that muddies the conversation about what you really are trying to do. Because I'll be honest, as much as I got a lot of information from the book and stuff, sometimes I have to ask myself, like, literally, like, sit down and think, like, what did I just read? Like, what was the point of the book?
Well,
you know?
Because, like, what happens when you have such a breadth of information like that, what you sacrifice is a sense of focus.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is one of the primary criticisms I have for the book, is that even though it does have a lot of information, and on its own, a lot of this information is pretty interesting, putting it all in one book lacks cohesion.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
That, and I don't want to beat the author too much, because I did like the book overall. Like, and it's pretty short too, so I actually feel like going back to it one of these days and giving it another listen and, re-listen to it so I can remember certain aspects of it and be like, oh yeah, that part about the, Exodus and Joshua and those games.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, I think having all these disparate elements and trying to, like, loosely tie them together under this umbrella of Wisdom Tree may have been a bit too ambitious for something that didn't really warrant it.
Yeah. Well, I'll go one further, because I really think that the author could have fleshed out the connections between everything, right? Because talking about it makes a lot of sense that, he would talk about Bible adventures through the guise of this company who was just trying to be rebels and trying to not pay Nintendo any royalties, right? And then going into, like, a genre that is pretty much not dominated by video games, or even, like, unheard of in video games, which is, religious and stuff. So it's really interesting how he went into that. But I think, like, with a better flow, like in the actual book and storytelling and stuff, I think, it would have made it a smoother experience. Because you're right, there is a lot of information. And I personally loved, like, his talks with the former people who worked for Color Dreams and stuff and Wisdom Tree. Mm-hmm. I thought that those were, like, some of the more interesting conversations in the book. And yeah, and also, I'll be honest too, like, one of my favorite parts in the book was actually when, the author would really put himself in the book and kind of display his connection to Wisdom Tree and stuff like that, and his connection to Bible adventures. Not so much about ruminating the fact that, well, maybe I should write about Bible adventures, because I don't really think that. I think he spent too much time on that part where he's like, maybe I should. In the beginning, yeah. Yeah. I think the personal part is actually what really hooked me immediately, right? Like, when he basically said, like, yeah, like, when I was growing up and stuff, my father was a pastor, and, video games and stuff, like, Bible Adventures was there, tried to play it and stuff like that. And that really gripped me. And so I was really curious how he was going to get into the details of it. And then he immediately switches to, like, hey, there's this company called Color Dreams who's trying to reverse engineer the NES. And I'm like, and that's when the time when I was like, wait, why are we talking about these guys? Because honestly, I'm not too knowledgeable when it comes to Bible adventures, right? But
see, I didn't have that reaction because I already knew that. Mm-hmm. So I knew where he was going, but hearing from your perspective, it makes sense why you would be confused.
Right. And because the way that he introduced it and stuff, and I understand that, sometimes it flows better that way if it's an abrupt transition, but it was really abrupt. And I was like, what? Why are we talking about Color Dreams? And mind you, again, I'm not trying, I might sound like I'm, slamming the book at all, but I actually really like the book. And just like Daniel and stuff, I want to reread it because it is very snack sized, if you will. I want to say it's like 3 to 4 hours or something, right?
Yeah, it's like 3 hours. It's short, but it's also dense. Mm-hmm. Like, he doesn't really waste any time in that respect. Like, there's a lot of information, and he tries to pack it all in.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder sometimes if he actually let some of these things breathe, if the book would feel, like fine, like it would actually feel differently than how we feel right now about the book,
Right. I think what you're saying is like if you would have spaced out the information a little more, it would have helped out the pacing.
Yeah, like I feel like there isn't enough time for us to languish on some of the concepts that he's introduced or some of the revelations and stuff, and we're just kind of moving along this conveyor belt of information,
Right. And that's another reason why I want to go through it again, is because I don't feel like all of the information sat with me the way it should have.
Right.
And that's why I want to go back to it, so that the information can sit with me better.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, and I think that's a testament to the kinds of information that he's presenting as well. And granted, we criticize the narration and stuff and even the flow of the book, but there is a wealth of knowledge here that, and wisdom, if you will. And, that I think it's well worth reading, even at least once and stuff. I think the book definitely has a lot of really interesting things to say about religious, kind of game development and stuff like that, and kind of the challenges. Like that's where I really kind of stuck it in there, because like, when he started talking about the challenges of depicting Jesus Christ, in a video game, like, oh my God, like he went through so much painstaking detail and like the considerations that need to happen, because
yes, he talked about the ludonarrative dissonance of playing as Jesus Christ. I was like, this is fucking amazing.
It is, and I loved it. And the way that he did it was such a way that he literally almost created a game design document of like, what if Jesus was the main protagonist? And I'm like, holy crap, that would actually be pretty cool. I would buy it.
Like, it sounds like he was just talking about an RPG at some point.
Right. He sold me on the idea, believe it or not. Like, I'm atheist myself, but I'm like, I'll buy that.
Yeah, so am I, actually.
Yeah, and so, and that's kind of the thing with this book, is that there's, we're overly critical here because we want more people to read this book. And I know some of you guys will hear what we say and we're like, okay, that's not for me. But if you give it a shot and stuff, I think there's actually a lot of stuff that's really cool that is in this book. And I think one of the best things about the book is definitely the passion that the author has with everything about the subject matter. Like, it's blowing with information. It's so dense, like you said. And I think that that's really what makes this book really stand out, for the best, for the better and stuff, really. And you could even hear it from the narrator's voice and stuff, from the author's voice for that matter. And I think that, certainly, like, this is, man, there's some really cool shit in this book.
Absolutely. Despite some of our complaints, I would honestly recommend it. And I would also say, as a companion piece of sorts, the Angry Video Game Nerd actually has covered the majority of the games that are mentioned in this book in his like Bible games trilogy. So I would say, like, after you're done reading the book and you want to have like a good idea of like what these games actually looked and played like, you could watch his videos and then be like, oh, okay, this is what was being referred to in the book.
Yeah.